Good evening, good evening. Holding off a little bit on a Gen Con news video because we're waiting on a more detailed post that's supposed to go up on the Jessica website at some point tomorrow or the next day, so I figured rather than make a video with kind of half of that information, I'd hold off on that. And plus, we have 18 Endeavor cards to go through, and it's going to be a little while before this current round of previews is done, so we'll split the difference. We'll get Endeavor out there and look up forward to a news video in the next day or two or something like that. But for now, we're here to talk about cards. So here is Endeavor. I think, he's a little simple, right? He's a starter deck. He just does stats. But the stats he does, it's a pretty good setup. So one thing that strikes me is that Earth and Evil in particular have some problems with a lack of speed reduction. And so having a character that has it on their face is very welcome for those symbols. Give or take, maybe they'll get, their version of Specialist of Sound or something in this set. But if they don't, then Endeavor is going to be automatically interesting if you're just looking to build a deck on those symbols just because he has the speed hate on him. And on offense, the option select of speed or damage, we've seen that be good in All Might, who's obviously, drawing some cards and whatnot. But still, the ability to pick whether you want speed or damage is pretty good. And the damage reduction is sort of not a big selling point, but it's there if you need it. You can shave a couple damage net off of something if you know you're taking it and they know you're taking it. Better to have it than to not have it, of course. Let you make up for some of those other health costs on his face. Yeah, it's a little hard for this character to be bad. I mean, he's going to have to find some cards, right? He has the same issues as every other 6-hand size stat stick, except that a lot of the other ones that you can think of, like things like Ingenium, things like Ida, their offensive side is kind of on once per turn abilities. And if you think of something like a Dobby, they don't even have a defensive ability. So he's got a really nice little balance of offense and defense. I think he's almost certain to be B tier. I could see with the right card pool and the right meta, he could sneak up to like an A- kind of tier, like have a rogue shot of winning an event with if the cards come together for him. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and call him B tier. I think he's certainly good, and he's wide open, right? He doesn't have any keyword requirements, so it'll be interesting to see what people do with this guy. One last thing I'll note before I move on. You are allowed, there's a couple cards in his kit that have this health gate on them where you have to have less than 10 or less than half or something like that. You're allowed to play those two bottom enhances on your own attack if you want, and they say your rival's attack, so they won't do anything. So if you get down to 20, you can burst yourself down to 15 from there. So if your opponent's trying to play around those cards, your effective health the effective bar for the health they need to avoid is a little bit higher with this guy. That said, those cards aren't too crazy. I don't think people are really going to play around them, but worth noting. The first attack in the kit is this Arctic Conflagration. The powerful 3 here is on a 2-speed mid is obviously underwhelming. That said, people play Net Gun Surprise, obviously for the block primarily, but when they attack with it, they get their 3 mid 3 stun 2. That's not bad. Stun 2 is pretty good on basically any package, and 5 damage is pretty much going to bait a block, so this is really sort of extra good at putting a crack in the defense if you're trying to get something bigger through, because if they're probably not just going to take 5, they might just take 5, but then you've dealt 5, right? That's cool. It's hard to say. It does have the ally keyword that might get it into some decks. We're going to have 3 sets now. I'm going to say this every time. It's going to be harder and harder for stuff to find deck space, but I wouldn't be surprised if a deck that's looking for some kind of a stun angle decides to include a couple of these. Just to add to the stun in a nice package, especially if the character can give some speed or something to that, make that 2 a little more appealing. I don't think it'll be everywhere, but I think it'll show up. I think it'll be pretty good when it does. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. And, just to recap, because it's like my 3rd or 4th of these characters, I'm going to give a basic, tier outline prediction, nothing too super precise. And the same with these individual cards. I'm going to give a 1 to 5 scale up sort of their impact of, 5 is going to be like a huge card in the meta, and a 1 is going to be a coaster, and, everything in between. So yeah, that's just what we're doing, just a simple 5-point scale. Next card, Blazing Fury. This is the block on this one is rough, but the effect is obviously really good. It's certainly limited to characters that are going to make it 8 automatically, and then it's effectively from the attack itself, you're getting 2 guaranteed damage and still a 4 mid-6 behind it, and a momentum hate. That's all a nice package. It's going to be interesting to see how people weigh it against the bad block. There's great options at 5/3 that have better blocks on all of these symbols for sure. It does have that Fury range. There is something to be said, especially on the fire symbol, for being able to key off of both the Fury and ranged keywords. You kind of want to be playing Frigid Heatwave in a lot of these decks. So it's nice to also be able to play your combo Fury stuff. That's it. This card's too good for me to give it a 2. Like, at the end, that might be what it'd be, where it only actually shows up in a couple decks, and it's kind of okay. But it seemed that, like, the power level is certainly there. This is a really hard one to judge. I think the block's probably going to turn people away from it more than it should. So I'm going to give it... I'm still going to give it a 3, though. I think... I could see a world where, like, if this shows up in one deck list, right, and looks pretty good, then you'll start seeing it in more deck lists, and it'll be a little more popular. Not like crazy, though. Flame Scourger. This is another weird one. A lot of these attacks are kind of very, very in the middle. Like, they're not like mediocre or disappointing or anything, but it's hard to say. A lot of these are actual mid-zone so far, too. 4 mid-6 stun 1 is honestly not that exciting. Maybe you might have a 3, it could be Uwabami, I think. I don't know remember if she has water. I don't think she does, but you could be a character that has a theme that's looking for this for some reason, wants stun attacks or whatever, but I just don't think 4 mid-6 stun 1 that is sometimes also just going to be a 4 mid-3 is going to make very many cuts. I think most decks are going to have a better option than this. It's certainly cool, but you're gonna find better ways to get your stats than to be sort of selling out to this overcommit and not be able to poke with this effectively and not be able to rely on it, and it's just a mid block. So yeah, I think this is pretty disappointing. I'm sure some people will try to play it, especially early on. There are going to be decks that are running, like Making a Stand, that just need to find any stun attacks that will slot this in, but I think it's going to be pretty limited to stuff like that, so I'm going to give it a 2. Hellflame Pounce. 3 difficulty attacks are cool. Sometimes you just want a 3 difficulty attack. It has the low block. It has Charge Fury and Slam. That's an interesting keyword combination that may put it in some spots that are really looking for some weird keyword mixes. But it is in and of itself. We talked about this a little bit in Eraserhead's kit. The 3 diff stat sticks are not that exciting unless you're really, really know that you're going to be drawing a lot of cards and playing a long string and giving all of them even more stats. Right? You could have 4 Hellflame Pounce and 4 of some other 3 difficulty attack, and your characters, you have Dobby or something putting 3 on everything, and you're on that sort of a plan, but outside of those, and the fact that it can't be your last attack if you want it to get the 3 low 4 is pretty limiting. It's certainly, again, like all of these, on paper, like, the rate is fine, but the actual in-world fitting it into a deck is probably going to be a little tough. I think it's interesting for, certainly interesting in the Endeavor starter as an off zone, as a safe, relatively safe poke that you can just lob out there and, like, here's my 3 low 6 or my 5 low 4, what are you going to do about it? I'll show you my attack, whatever. But it could be a neat little role player. On its face, it's a little hard for cards like this to see room, but when they do show up, there's usually something really good going on. But I'm gonna leave it at a 2. I do like the card. I like a lot of these cards I'm giving low ratings. They're just, deck building is tough. Space is tight. This one is a little more interesting, Hellflame Stomp. So it's got the really nice block. It is a fire kick that's going to see it some play. It has this optional can be a 4 low 6, can be a 6 low 4. You have to pay health about for it, so you have to think about that a little bit. But having that option is certainly good. You know, unlike the Flame Conflagration, it's always a 4 speed for 6 if that's what you want it to be, right? Unless you're at exactly 2 or 1. So it's a lot more reliable. It's off zone. It has a better block. It also has this Endeavor response. I think we're gonna see this card sort of filling the like, I just need a decent 4/3 that's gonna do stuff slot in decks pretty commonly. As the card pool grows, it's gonna get pushed out. It could even be just, you know, somewhere else in the set there's another really popular 4/3 option. But I think for the time being, you're probably gonna see this card quite a bit, and it's not gonna wow anybody. It's not gonna, you know, take over the form like, oh my god, I can't deal with Hellfire Stomp or anything, but it should be good. It should be pretty common. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 4 for the time being for our 3-set format where we haven't seen most of the third set yet. Ignited Arrow. This is another spicy one. So we've seen, this is not double jab Pummel. It's obviously not double jab Pummel, but we've seen the power with double jab and some other cards of these really threatening block punishes. If you block this, I'm going to get this big boost in card quality. In this case, I'm actually just going to go and find another attack. That's pretty good. That's pretty threatening. It makes it tough to block. Characters that can put some damage on it are going to put the opponent in some awkward situations. And, you know, you have to deal with similar, not quite. I mean, Pummel's a 3 mid 5, at least it's 5 damage. This is a 2 high 4. This is actually kind of bad stats. And, you know, +2 high block instead of a +1. There's the obvious comparison there, but you don't need the combo. You don't get blown out by Faith Shield. It doesn't put a bunch of restrictions on what kind of deck you need to be running. You could see this fitting into, you know, if there's enough throws on one of these symbols, this could be the sort of non-throw that's filling it in the deck of, like, here's my non-throw, but do you really want to block it? Yeah, I think this is going to be really good when it shows up. It's not Pummel good, but I think people are going to have a lot of impact with this card, if provided that these symbols see some play. I'm going to go ahead and give that a 4. Prominence Burn is the one that has people pretty excited. This is interesting because it's the kind of card that unless you're Aoyama 1 or something, you're probably not playing it on turn 2. You could, you know, I guess Tokoyami could try to stretch it, right? You could Dark Shadow into, you know, Dark Shadow Ruin into Summon Dark Shadow and then play this guy on a 4, and then you won't, I don't think Ruin's a Fury attack though, so it's a little hard to fit into a deck like that, but you got an effect like that that's a one-off check boost that you're trying to mix with this somewhere in the set. Doesn't show a first day of class, but something might be out there in any event. For the most part, this is like turn 4, turn 5. You know, I want to get up and over kind of card. It's going to +1 block in the meantime. It's a really hard card to rate because we haven't really had cards like this in this format yet. You know, we have Gale Force Punch and Detroit Smash. You know, Gale Force you want to play early. Detroit, you have to work really, really hard to actually land. There's sort of, Gale Force is a different kind of card, really. Whereas this is saying, you know, the game's, it's reached turn 4, turn 5, and I can afford this difficulty, and this is really going to help me, you know, put together a string that can get up and over this opponent that's trying to block everything, right? Here's my 6 size 7, my next is getting speed. Here's some burn. I'm getting a card out of my card pool. It's doing quite a lot. It's gonna be super meta dependent whether this actually shows up as a real card in a lot of decks, or if it's just kind of this, you know, square peg that doesn't have any nice square holes to fit into. I'm gonna be a little bullish on it just because I can think immediately of, you know, a Fire Kirishima running this, for instance. I'm gonna give it the 4, but it could easily be like a 3 or a 2 type card, which it just ends up being kind of niche in practice depending on the way the meta shakes out. Scorching Aura. I'd be more excited if this wasn't mid. It is doing a bunch, right? You get a nice little breaker block. It's a 2 mid 5. It's effectively a 2 mid 7. If this thing lands, you're super happy, but it is a whole lot of 2 speed mid. So I'm not really sure where this fits. You would need characters giving it more than 2 speed, or, you know, it's like the cheeky 1 or 2x mid attack in your deck. It's just like, Again, another like role player maybe fits a slot or two. Doesn't actually do anything special aside from the breaker, right? It is again, it's just stats. At the end of the day, it's just dealing damage and healing you a little bit. So cool card. It'll be fun in the starter. I'm not bullish in how much it's going to show up in constructed. I'm going to give it a 2. All right, and then we get into the foundations. We have Arrogant Smirk. Kind of a neat anti-damage reduction ability here. These are, obviously as useful as, the format's damage reduction looks like. And it has something similar to the resting between bouts from set 2, where you can blow it up to pick up a block. Obviously doesn't compare quite as nicely to Struggling with Studies, which is an absurd rate, so we shouldn't really expect all these cards to be struggling with studies. I think this card's pretty good. I don't think it'll be everywhere. It's not going to be like a staple foundation or anything like that, but I could definitely see decks sliding in a couple copies and having it do pretty good for them. So I'm going to give it a 3. Coping with number 1, conditional E-commit card draw. We saw one of these in the Eraserhead kit. Until the meta modifies to a different place. Right now, the meta is a lot about drawing cards, so I'm just going to slam that 4 on it. And, we'll see. If we get into more of a speed and damage meta, then drawing cards isn't as good because, or speed in particular, like speed and stun. If you can't pass all the blocks, it doesn't help you to keep blocking more of them, right? Or it doesn't help you as much. You're just looking at card quality at that point. But for now, we are where we are. This could end up being a 3 where it just kind of shows up sometimes, but out of the gate, I think it's going to be a pretty popular card. Fastest Flame. Weird first enhance on this. I mean, I get it. They don't want to overkill with the Let's Fight Bad Guys as easily, right? If you have 4 Fastest Flame, 4 Let's Fight Bad Guys, at least you can only play one of the Fastest Flames. Enhance. Having to do it first, it can be a little bit tricky. A lot of times you get some information over the enhance that makes you feel good about flipping the +2 speed on something like Let's Fight Bad Guys. I could see 1 or 2 of this showing up in decks. I think it's going to miss a lot of cuts, really, especially you're thinking like Earth and Evil decks aren't going to have mono fire attacks, so it'll be around a little bit, but you would need to be on like a fire mono range deck that doesn't have other things to be doing. That's like I'm describing Tokoyami kind of here. So it'll have its places. I'm going to give it a 3, though. I don't think it's going to be quite as popular. The block's not as good as the other ones. It could end up being a 2 kind of card. Press Conference. This card's cute and probably not good. I don't think a 1/5 that is going to one-off -1 difficulty attack. I mean, it's better than the Deku starter card that's a 2/5 that does this. But man, you need to be really hard pressed for high blocks or really hard pressed for passing checks or something if you're running this, I think. Cards like this can be okay one-ofs. It's not a coaster, but I don't expect to see it that much. Quick to act. This is a little more interesting. Free speed spam on a 0/5 is really, really good. It is not active early, but if you have, if you have an Endeavor deck especially, and you're worried about, okay, I have the cool stats of my character, but how am I going to get up and over in a long game when my opponent's really built out? Well, if you've taken a couple hits, getting a couple copies of Quick to Act out can really, really put the speed pressure on. It probably won't see play in 7-handers. And I'm not sure how I feel about running this in a character that doesn't have health costs that can sort of push them under half from, somewhat much further away from half. Endeavor at 20 gets to press this button if he really needs it. And if he's playing like Hellfire Stomp or something, he can press it from 22. Outside of that, it might end up being kind of character only or something that people slot a couple copies in of just because they want more spam, and it's better than a Recovery Girls Kiss kind of card. I think it'll be around. It'll be okay. It'll be really good in certain decks. I'm going to give it a 3. Soul Piercing Glare. This is a tough one to read. So these symbols don't have a lot of targeted committal off the top of my head. They might be getting some. But I'm thinking, cards like Electric Jolt don't share with this. So you don't necessarily get to activate a target commit and then go knock something out. But Enhanced Commit to flip a committed foundation has, in previous versions of the game and previous metas, that has been a relevant effect that's been useful at times. So you're not sad to have it. You're going to activate that a reasonable amount of the time, especially if there's a foundation with playable committed, obviously. If you're a stun deck, for instance, you might use this to knock out a someone with style that's sitting there committed. And then Enhanced Remove, take a Fury attack out of your card pool, -1 progressive for the turn. Not quite as good as the, was it Arrogance? No, the 2/5, I'm blanking on the name right now, but the 2/5 card from the Bakugo starter that clears one on a flip, but it has to deal damage. Encouragement, that's the one. I don't know. It's kind of going to depend on what the 3 difficulty competition is on these symbols. Off the top of my head, it's generally pretty good. I think you would probably need to have some specific play of Wall Committed in mind that you want to hit with this. That said, those are going to be around, I think. So I think this will show up maybe in some sideboards in particular. I think it'll have some homes. Stare Down, the introduction of Freeze. If you do not know what Freeze does, Freeze is kind of like Seal. It's an effect that you put on a foundation. And it just says this card doesn't ready during the next ready step. It's sort of locked down, ready during its owner's next ready step. So it effectively stun ones them at the start of their turn, except that you have some say over what gets committed. This is not a very good rate for that. This your turn only flip to 1-off freeze 1 is, for any card you can come up with a scenario where like, oh, but if this exact situation is happening, this is going to be really good. But I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of value out of this most of the time. That's what people do play Final Exam Failures, which is sort of similar, where you're flipping your 2/5 to essentially make them commit a foundation. That's maybe a little bit better than this with the timing that you're getting out of it, but... And I don't think that card's very good. I am going to go ahead and give this a 1. I think people are going to try to play this card a little bit, but I don't think it's going to see very many version 2 or 3s of decks. World Spectator, E-Commit Weapon gets -3 speed. We have, this is basically the Bakugo card, but for weapons, it's a 1/6. It has the 2 block. It doesn't share with Specialized Sound Wave, so it doesn't get to see any like automatic play for that reason. I don't know, if weapon attacks are popular, maybe people run this as a 6 check. It's really hard to rate, should you run a card just for the 6 check? I've never really been a big fan of that, but there are some people who are, so I think it'll show up. But this is sort of just the 2. If it shows up more than a little bit, it'll be some niche like 6 check deck, or it'll be because, I don't know, Stain all of a sudden is running over the meta or something. Granted, like, the best deck right now is Momo, and she is killing people with certain weapon attacks, so it may be a little bit better than a 2, but it's hard to main deck a card like this unless you have some definitive purpose for the 6 check, or it's an off-zone block you really need, and at a mid block, I just don't see this showing up in the mains. And our last card is Unnerving Energy. This is a very interesting one. So it's basically reverse Coolin Student, and Coolin Student's a pretty good rate. The only reason we don't see that card more is just because of its symbols and, other momentum outlets competing with it. This is on, Earth, Evil, Fire. You're not necessarily going to have, the auto include, oh, well, your deck probably has Meteor Shower, probably has Ice Storm. Your fire decks might still have Ice Storm, but you might not have exciting uses for momentum. I think of Evil in particular as a symbol that going into this set doesn't have a lot of exciting momentum outlets. And you know, minus 2ing their check once per turn is kind of better than plus 2ing your own in a lot of ways. You know, obviously there's still the same output value, but just having this to trip up a kill turn attempt, thinking of something like challenging the fakes that requires you to take damage, can only be used once. This, if you can keep fueling momentum, is going to be really good. I don't think, you know, it's certainly not going to be everywhere. I think it'll show up in decks that think they can reliably get momentum, whether they're playing the throw package or their character makes momentum or similar. And I think in those decks it's going to be really a troubling card for people to try to get up and over. So, you know, I'll give it a 3. It'll have a medium impact. It's going to show up somewhere and look really good, but not quite everywhere. And yeah, that does it for Endeavor and his kit. Not the highs aren't as spiky highs as some of Eraserhead's stuff. It's a lot of, you know, Hellflame and Ignited Arrow sort of cool utility moves. There's Prominence Burn is potentially really good, but it's not quite a build around in the way that Total Erasure Binding is going to be. But, you know, these cards should largely, you know, a bunch of them be sort of useful, interesting additions to the meta. Especially just all the Fury plus ranged. I can't be the only person that's done UVS Ultra searches for the Fury ranged combination and felt just like a little bit wanting, like I want 1 or 2 more options, and now we've got a bunch of more options. So it'll be fun to see where this goes. Yeah, so our next preview coverage video will probably be the 8 characters that are in the set, plus the secret rare that was shown off at Gen Con. So that's going to be another 4 days yet. So other than that, look forward to a news video in the next day or 2 once we get more information on the international announcement and the provisionals and all that went down there. But until then, you know, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you think I'm brutally wrong on some cards or whatever. Always fun to discuss things. If you have any really cool ideas for Prominence Burn in particular, that might be interesting to hear. I know you can remove itself. I don't think that's a particularly good use for it, but you are allowed to remove itself. But I'll be curious. I'm sure some people have been really in the tank on what to do with Prominence Burn, and it'd be fun to see what they say. But yeah, until next time, take care.